Well, good morning. I can see faces, and I know I've met several of you. I've got two parish families and my deacons here. So anyway, it's good to be with you all today. And Richard was right. I think it was almost 4 months ago now. I don't know. Maybe it was longer than that. And Archbishop pulled me aside one day and said, "I'd like you to be the vocation director for the Archdiocese." And I said to him, "Are you sure?" And that's the first words that came out of my mouth. And when you receive a kind of a call, sometimes it knocks you over, and you don't expect it. Maybe you felt like that, like, I would like to ask this person to marry me, or like you have a child, and you're like, before the child's born, you're like, how am I going to raise a child? I don't know if that's something you thought about. I tell people all the time, I'm not a parent, so I don't know if that went through your mind. But when I began to feel that call to priesthood, that very much went through my mind. I was talking to a discerner just this last week, and he was kind of saying he was nervous about this. And I said, don't worry. I was so nervous to speak publicly. I was never an altar server growing up. Never an altar server. I know. I'm the one priest. I was in college before I served my first Mass. So that's how nervous I was, how anxious I was to be in front of people and talk. I remember being at St. Joseph in Norman. If you live in Norman, you go to all three parishes. But anyway, at the time we were at St. Joseph in Norman, and I remember the door, you could see the sacristy door open, and this is way back a long time ago, and the priest in the sacristy was smoking a cigarette, and he was kind of dressing down an altar server, and I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. The door would open, and it was like one of those, it would close automatically, then the door would open again, he's still talking to that server, he's still smoking, and I'm just like, whoa, that's just too much. So anyway, I was just too scared. So I was talking to this guy this last week, and I said, that's what seminary is for. It's there to kind of take those rough edges and kind of smooth everything out, and hopefully through that whole formation process to make someone who can actually stand up in front of the people and, with all his warts and all, attempt to preach the gospel. So that's kind of how I am where I am today. And as a mother in my parish once said, when I think she was having her wonderful family, her 10th child, and someone said, how do you do it? And she said, you don't have that grace to have that child until you have the child. And I remember being at my first Mass as a priest, and one of the seminarian servers leaned over to me and he said, are you nervous? And I said, no, actually I'm not. And I was made for this. That's what I said. And so I think that's what but that was that feeling I felt at that moment, and that's kind of, I think, where we all are. And that's what God wants to do in our lives. So you're here to hear my vocation story, and as you hear these, and it sounds like you have priests come, all different kinds of priests, and I think Father Simeon from St. Gregory's will be wonderful. We were in the seminary together for a couple years before he discerned to go from the diocese to the monastery. And I shook his hand. He was going by all of our kind of dorm rooms, and he was trying to sell his DVD collection, all his personal things. He said, if I'm going to go monastery, I'm going to go in a poor man and have sold all my belongings. So he really embraced that poverty in religious life. And so I think you'll love hearing from him. But anyway, and just an aside, yesterday I was talking to Archbishop Coakley, and we have, I'm supposed to start July 2nd, my job, but we've been getting emails and calls. We have two guys that want to start the application process pretty soon, and it's quite a lengthy process. And so yesterday, speaking to Father Bittner, was the current vocation director, I said, is there any way I can just go ahead and start now so I can put vocation director by my name? Because it doesn't make any sense for him to start meeting with these guys and then him transfer them to me. And so yesterday, I kind of officially but unofficially assumed that role. So I haven't even changed my email, signature line yet. But that is to allow me to kind of enter and start working with these guys. And the job of vocation director is to walk with men who are discerning, is God calling me to be a priest? And so that's kind of what I most look forward to do in this line of work for however long the Archbishop wants me. I told him, I said, if it's really good, I'll keep doing the work. And if it turns out really bad, you can always say, hey, step aside, it's okay. So we'll find out. But anyway, my story. I was born July 5th, 1979, right? To Margot and Glenn Wickersham, my parents. And I was baptized. I was born in Norman, so I'm a lifelong Norman guy. a member of all three parishes. And when I was ordained a priest, my kind of parish was St. Thomas More. And so that's where I went to OU, and that's kind of where I discovered my vocation. And so my first Mass was at St. Thomas More in the old church that was built the same year I was born. And if you've been to the old St. Thomas More, it was designed by a Buddhist. The church was going through a very strange period, designed by a Buddhist, and it had chairs instead of pews. The idea was we're going to be bringing in Protestants, the whole church, it's just going to be kumbaya. And so we're going to have chairs instead of kneelers, and no kneelers. We're just going to stand during the Eucharistic prayer. And that was kind of if you lived through it, I was born in it, and so the church was dedicated the same year I was born. And I always said, because I'm a member there, honorary still, I aged better than that church did. So, not the new one. The new one's absolutely beautiful. And if you're offended by that, I'm sorry, but that's just my opinion. So I was born in Norman, and when you're born in Norman, you didn't have much need to go to Oklahoma City, So I just lived in Norman, grew up in Norman, Norman public schools, never went to a Catholic school, never served at the altar at Mass. I was baptized at Sacred Heart Church in Mangum, Oklahoma. That's where my grandparents lived, and so I'd spend my summers there. So a city kid, but the summers we were kind of down there when they were harvesting cotton and it's blowing through town and stuff. And so that little Sacred Heart Church in Mangum, it holds a very, very close spot in my heart. And to this day, many of the community, they're still there, It's a small little church, and so it gave me a wonderful feel for the kind of dichotomy in our archdiocese. We have these great city parishes. And now the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine, which can pack in 2,000 people per Mass, And then you go to like my little church in Crescent. I call it my little slipper chapel because it's like the size of a slipper. And if we have 75 people in that church, we're packed. And we get there, some Sundays 60, 65, so not doing too bad. But that little Sacred Heart Church in Mangum will forever hold a very close place in my heart. I did many a vacation Bible school there. But as we grew up in life, we were kind of like many Catholics. We went through our fits and starts where my family would go to Mass or not go to Mass. And I was about 5 years old, and my parents pulled me into their room and said, "We're getting a divorce." And so as a child, those kind of things, they hit you, and how do you work through those? And I'm not sure I still have worked through all that. But anyway, we just take it as it comes. And so my parents divorced, and so I went through growing up that kind of one weekend you're with your mom, who's Catholic, and then my father left the church when he remarried, and so the next week we go to the Baptist church. And so I remember we were with my father for a week in the summer, and we had to go to a vacation Bible school at the Baptist church. And they were all singing this song, and I remember how it goes, "Yes, I'm proud to be a Christian, yes, I'm proud." And all I knew was I was Catholic. I wasn't Christian, I was Catholic. And so in that song, I was singing, "Yes, I'm proud to be a Catholic, yes, I'm proud." All the kids were looking at me like, this guy's crazy. Years later, I find out Christian and Catholic they're the same thing, right? And so we believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and through that sacramental relationship, we find salvation. And so I'm proud to be a Christian and a Catholic. But as I grew up, it was harder for me to connect with the church as a child. And so any opportunity for us to kind of sleep in, or find any other excuse not to go to Mass, that was my kind of thing, and it was my family's thing. And I had one sister growing up, and we were at each other's throats. It was like oil and water. We get along great now, which is wonderful. But growing up, we were just always at each other's, throats. And so then eventually my father moved to Michigan. And funny story, he kind of always says this. He said, one day I was driving on I-35 and I saw a refrigerator in the middle of the interstate, and he said, "It's time to move." So I don't know. I said, "Dad, we don't have refrigerators in the middle of I-35. And we're always looking for our excuses, right? And so he moved to Michigan in the early 90s. And so we would go spend the entire summer up in Michigan. And so that was kind of life, And so I got into high school, and high school's a mess for kids, right? It's just hard. You're figuring out who you are as a person, and who you like, who you don't like, who likes you and who doesn't like you, And so We all got to get through it. And I don't know if I did it too well, but at that time I was in confirmation back when we were in high school, and so I remember getting confirmed, and that time we were at St. Mark. So you see we were hopping around, right? So we were at St. Mark the Evangelist, the new St. Mark. They hadn't built the new church yet. It was still in the parish hall. And I was getting confirmed, and I was kind of into the classes and learning about it. And I was like, it makes sense and stuff. But the day of confirmation, we were meeting with the bishop right before confirmation, as he so often does. And it was a brand newly ordained Archbishop Beltran. It was like 3 months after he'd been not ordained, but made the Archbishop of Oklahoma City. And so I walk out of this classroom that he was teaching us, and I'm looking for my family. And, I'm just kind of an awkward teen. And I'm walking, and I don't see the Archbishop is next to me, and I'm waving at my family, and I just step into the Archbishop. And I was big back then, as I'm now, and he was about the same size. I about knocked him over. I caught him, and I was like, I'm so sorry. And he confirmed me. So yeah. And he remembers that day, Just an aside, he's doing pretty good. He's slowing down. I was at the pastoral center about a month ago, and I saw him outside of his house. So I pulled up into his house, and I got out of my car, and he was out there, and we talked for a couple of minutes. And so his mind is still sharp, He still remembers that day when this giant high school kid almost knocked him over. But anyway, and when I got confirmed, I felt something, I felt a power, and fortunately, it was not enough to kind of overpower the craziness of the high school life, right? And so within a few months, I told my mother, I'm done with church, really, And so she's like, all right, you're, 16 or 17 or whatever. And so I think she just got sick and tired of being sick and tired of fighting, And so she kind of gave in. And so, I got my high school jobs, I did all that kind of stuff, but I stopped going to Mass. And I think I took about a 5-year break. So, and then I graduate high school. And what does a Norman kid do? Well, he doesn't go to OSU, right? He goes to the University of Oklahoma. And so I was accepted to the University of Oklahoma in Norman. And, I spent 4 years there. And in that 4 years, I discovered a lot. And so I'm pretty thick in the head. And so when God needs to get a hold of me, he has to do it in kind of pretty big ways. And so I was in my early sophomore year in college at OU, and I declared to study political science and history. That was my major. And so go vote, right, today, right? I did my duty. And so I was in poli-sci, and I was really getting involved in that. My goal was to go to law school after college, and then eventually maybe get into politics. And so in my sophomore year, it was around the time of the 2000 election before that. And so several friends of mine and I, we went and actually worked in the Iowa caucuses. And over Christmas break, we drove up to Iowa. Campaign didn't pay us. We're like, college kids. And we worked a presidential campaign. We knocked doors. We folded brochures. We did all this kind of stuff. And so we did that for like 2 weeks during Christmas break. And then my two friends, they announced they were actually going to leave, take a semester off, and then actually just go with the campaign without being paid and do that. That's just kind of how the political science kind of thing we were. And I was like, nope, I'm finishing college. Because several years ago, a military recruiter told me, you'll never finish college. And I said, I'll do it in 4 years. And so that was my goal right there. And so my friends wanted to go do the campaign, and they're like, we'll take 4.5, 5 years, whatever, to get our degree. I was 4 years and I'm done, right? And I never wanted to go to school again after that. Well, little did I know what God had prepared for me. So I get back to Norman and OU. I start the spring semester, and I started to notice this spot on my chest. And being kind of vain, I would say, one of the vices I probably had at that time, I went to the dermatologist and said, hey, I got this here. And he goes, that's nothing. I said, well, it's not nothing to me. Why don't you take it off? And he goes, okay, well, we send all these away for tests, and we'll let you know. they call like a few days later and said, it is malignant melanoma. And I'm 19 years old. And they said, if you don't have this removed quick, I mean, you're gonna have to come in for a little removal thing. And if the scan shows that we didn't get it all, then you have to come back in for an even bigger thing. And if it's gotten into your blood system, this is real bad. And so here I am, like 19 years old. I go home that night. I remember laying on my bed at home, looking up at the ceiling and thinking things that a 19-year-old never really thinks unless you're going off to war or facing the potential end of your life, you know? And so before that, in the last kind of several years since my confirmation, I had become in between an agnostic, that's a fence sitter. Like I can't decide who God is or what he is or who he says he is. And so I'm just gonna sit on the fence and pick no side, or atheism. Does God even exist? But it was the silliest way to answer those questions because I was just listening to the society, what the society said, right? Think of the now, this is it, this is all there is, you know, eat, drink, and be merry, you know, that kind of stuff. And so the test result came back from that first kind of scrape off the skin there, and they said, no, we didn't get it all. So I had to come back in, and to this day I have this like Frankenstein, you know, back 25 years ago, it was like I think it's gotten better, they tell me now, but it's like this giant scar with like still the stitch marks, and I'm not trying to gross you out. It's just, that was scary for a 19-year-old child, you know? And so I remember sitting on my bed that first night when they told me I had skin cancer, and I'd never contemplated my death before, to be honest with you, you know? As a child, I don't know. You don't really, that stuff scares you, you know? And so it was like Catholicism just kind of coming over me, right? Because aren't we supposed to contemplate our death? Not in like this great joyous way, but like, you know, am I ready? You know, if the Lord calls, am I ready? I was not ready. And so, I knew in that day, I decided I want to know the truth. And so that was my, you know, when I do make my mind up, it takes a while, but when I do, 4 years of college and I'm done no matter what. So my last semester, I was taking like 19 or maybe 20 hours of coursework, you know, just running myself crazy, but by golly, that military recruiter is wrong. I'm gonna finish college and do it in 4 years. And so that day I decided I want to find God. And I actually did it, this is the strangest thing, I did it in the most Catholic way, right? The Protestant Reformation tells us that faith and reason are separate, right? Reason is corrupted by sin, and so we have to discount it 100,000%, right? And all we have is faith alone. Scripture tells us that's not true, and our faith tells us we have faith and reason. And so I said, if I'm going to believe in God, I want to be able to argue that I can believe in God, you know? To be able to kind of like step up into that breach and say, this is what I believe, you know? Not just like I'm taking it on faith alone. And so through that, it was about the time of 9/11 and stuff, and so Islam was high on the list, and being at OU, you're exposed to all these different student organizations. And I had a class where you actually had to go to different religious groups and just check them out. So my cousin, who was there at the time, a year ahead of me, she invited me to this group called Chi Alpha. It's like very evangelical, like waving your hands, walking on the ceiling, you know. I mean, stuff that makes a Catholic real nervous. And so I wasn't sure I was Catholic, but I knew I wasn't that. And so we're sitting at this group, and I'm just like, putting my hands in my pocket because I don't know what to do with them, you know, and I can't hold them like this because that looks too formal, and everyone's up there just, you know, jumping around and stuff. And so I knew it wasn't that. I went to a few Islamic meetings trying to kind of like, you know, figure that out too, because that was a big deal at the time. And then we were, and even the Jewish student group and stuff, and I never really found that. And I just started picking the Bible up, you know, and reading it. I read the entire New Testament, you know, like 2 or 3 times in that one semester. And so that, just reading the scriptures daily, which is weird, going from nothing to that, I began to see the things that I remember I was taught, you know, about the Eucharist and all of that. And so I actually ordered I think it was, I can't remember the name of the book. It was one of them, a Scott Hahn book, right, of his journey to the Catholic Church. And I said, I want to be able to argue this and to be able to accept it in faith and by reason. And so, I mean, here I am all of a sudden like studying stuff, and I'm just like, wow. And I remember the day. It was about, I'd say, probably about 4 months after my skin cancer diagnosis, which once they did the final surgery, it's gone. It's come back once about 6 or 7 years ago, but every year I go and the dermatologist gets to know me very well. So that's how you stay healthy when you've had skin cancer at 19. So anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, the day. I remember this. I'd been studying the faith, reading the scriptures, and a few months before that, probably 2 months after my surgery, I went to my mother because she was coming back to the church that time. She kind of had a falling away too, and she started saying, she was kind of like the Virgin Mary, to Christ at the wedding feast, save the day. And so she would always ask me, do you want to go to church? No, I'm fine. And I remember the one day she said that, and she just kept asking, and I said, I think I would like to go. And so she said, well, you're in college. Why don't we go to St. Thomas More? And then it's crazy. After that, a few masses, someone said, hey, would you like to come do this group, this college group, campus ministry? So I said, sure, why not? And then like a month after that, this is 6 months after the diagnosis, I'm doing this search retreat. It's an over weekend kind of retreat, and it was just like super intense, And so you leave that retreat, you're just on this high. But anyway, just about that time, I decided to go to Mass the first time. A few times after that, a few weeks after, I remember I was at home and I was reading, and I said, by golly, like I just happened to be born and baptized into the faith that I do believe is the truth. And I remember that moment, and I'll fall back on that a lot when I have days where I'm just like, I want to run from all this, right? Don't we have that in your family, in your parish? Not everything goes well, right? Tempers flare, the wrong idea is taken, and we can't please anyone or everyone, right? And so there's days we want to run. That's the day I circle back on that moment when I realized this is the truth. And so that was it, And so it's just like these things started falling into place. I did that search retreat, and then like the next week we were at Mass, and they were praying for an increase in vocations to the priesthood. So I always make sure, as the parish pastor, that we have intercession for the priesthood at least several times a year. And they were praying for an increase in vocations to the priesthood and the consecrated life. And at that Mass, this light bulb came on in my head. Could you be a priest? And during that prayer, that moment in the prayer, right before the altar is set for Mass, the prayer of the faithful, and I would describe it as like, check my time, it's like the light bulb swinging in a closet. You pull the chain on the light bulb and it kind of swings around and stuff. This is how I describe it. That light bulb came on, and I took my hand and I smashed it. It hit the ceiling and smashed the bulb. And that light thing came back down and had another light bulb in there. It was on. Like, no. I've got it planned out. I'm going to go to law school, like in a year and a half. I'm going to, practice as an attorney. I may go into politics, My great-grandfather, by the way, was a U.S. congressman from Southwest Oklahoma. His name was Victor Wickersham. So if you're of a certain age, he would answer the phone, this is Victor Wickersham, your best friend. And so a true politician. And he was everyone's best friend, actually. So anyway, that light bulb would keep coming back on, and it started driving me crazy. And it drove me crazy. And it's the last thing I wanted to do, right? Priests are lonely, like they just live by themselves, and that's what I thought. And they're probably not well educated. I had no idea what went into making a priest. I thought you just say you want to be a priest, and the bishop says, okay, fine, and there you go. And I can't get up in front of people and talk. Like that's just not going to happen. And so that light just kept coming back on, and it just kind of drove me crazy. So I met with my pastor one day. I got the guts to go talk to him, and we spoke, and he said, I think the truest words of wisdom. He said, if you feel God is calling you, you should examine this. You should walk with this for a while. He said, you can get married, but you may wake up later in life and say, what could have been, And he said, it's not that the life that you would have would be bad or anything like that, but we want to hopefully find what God calls us to do. And so I got into my car at St. Thomas More, and I picked up, it was those first cell phones. They're like that big, And so we forget how big they were. And I'm like putting this up to my ear, and And I called the Archdiocese because he gave me this number. Because that's how I do it. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right then. So it was like, I was out of that meeting in my car. I called the Archdiocese and I got a voicemail. I was like, saved by the voicemail. Because who calls people back, right? Within 5 minutes, my phone rang. It was Father Lowell Stieferman. I don't know if anyone knows Father Stieferman. Really good priest. Passed away 6-7 years ago, I think, or longer. Was my vocation director almost through the whole thing. Just a kind of a calming presence, right? And he called me back, and within 2 days, I was in his office. And here, I'm like sitting there just like, I'm talking about being a priest? Oh my gosh, what is this, And anyway, the rest that's kind of it. So, but it had to take this diagnosis of skin cancer to get me to think, what is important in life? Who am I in relation to myself, to others, to the universe? Like, what is the origin of it all? And so, I can tell you a priest, especially since I'm starting to get into the vocation work, a priest, the bishop doesn't just say, hey, great, we'll have you, lay hands on you. I had to fly to Denver, Colorado for a psychological evaluation in the airport lounge. That's how they did it back then. They had to outsource it. So you went, and like I met this psychologist in an airport lounge. Everyone's crazy who flies. I was like, there's no way I'm going to get through this. Because, I left like at 5 a.m, and then we had a delay. We went through Oklahoma City to Dallas. I didn't book the flight. Oklahoma City to Dallas, then to Denver. And the flight in Dallas was late getting off. I didn't get back home until 2 a.m. the next day. It was like a 1 day there and back thing, but turned out to be like 22-hour long trip. And I remember I was frustrated with that and thinking, I was doing this in an airport lounge. There's no way they're going to approve me for seminary. And I remember Father Stieferman called me and said, well, you've been approved and we've assigned you to Conception Seminary in Missouri. And wow, yeah. So anyway, that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I don't want to bore you. I can go on and on. But that's really it. I think every priest has a different story. Some guys grew up knowing they were going to be a priest. Some played Mass. I did as a kid. I made my sister sick. I'd take bread, smash it down, and that'd be the communion. And my grandmother had this silver goblet, and she'd drink. And so one day she had so much bread and water, she literally, my poor sister. But that was early on. And then when I got into high school, all that was gone, And so I truly believe I'm one of those guys that was lost, and the Lord did find. And it just took, not lightning, but, a health issue in skin cancer to kind of waken me up. So I think that comes down to about 26 minutes. Anyone have any questions?
Father, what do you think is your biggest challenge going to be as vocations director?
So, I've talked to several of the past vocation directors, and one of the priests said, you have to ask yourself, will he be a good administrator? I don't think I would have been a good administrator when I was applying to seminary, so like at that time. And so there's this tension between the potential virtues and fruit you can see that could grow in this person, and so the question is, when do you take that risk? When do you take that risk? And so you can be too conservative and say no to people that you might have said yes to. And so that's that kind of tension. And I hope to, in my time, to really use what we have a kind of a seminary board, a vocation board, if you will, of priests and lay people, and to really use that board. My hope is to really get different impressions, just not my impression, And so, because we live in a fallen world, and our judgment sometimes is not the reality, right? And so I want to make sure I get a really good read on this person, And so the bishop said, my job is really to walk with them. And so, recognizing that each one of us has, St. John Vianney said, every person has a saint has a past, but they also have a future, right? And their future is the universal call to holiness. So that's going to be hard, and then to tell someone, maybe not this year for seminary, maybe, because you'll get these converts that are wonderful. I mean, who's a convert here? Raise your hand. Yeah. I often say converts. Yeah, exactly. You said it, I didn't want to say it. They tend to come at it, and it's like they know what they've missed, and they're happy to be here, and they don't take a day for granted. But then, I was just reading what's called the Program of Priestly Formation. There's a book on how to walk with guys through seminary. And yesterday I was able to finish my part in that. And then the next half is like the seminary's part. I'm going to read it anyway, just so I know what's going on. And so the church says there should be like a 2-year period after someone becomes Catholic before they are accepted into seminary. And so there's moments, one of the things I didn't tell you all was Father Stieferman told me, I was a sophomore at that time, and he said, why don't you finish your degree? So I think he could see some things in me potentially, but he's like, let's let time work here. He kind of came back to the faith. Let's give it 2 years. Will he fall away? That kind of stuff. And so I think it'll be hard to tell someone that, And then the real hard one is, to tell them that, it takes two to tango. And so what you believe you're called to and what the church believes you're called to may be two different things. And so I've been told by other vocation directors that one of the hardest things is to tell a man, at this time, we do not believe you're called to be a priest, And so that can be a hard thing, And then you can say, you can reapply in 2 years, 3 years, or we just don't believe that that's something. Yeah.
To dovetail on that, if I could, thank you so much for sharing about that administrative piece, because I don't know any priest that's ever told me, what I really relish about my priesthood is all these meetings and administration. So I think it made me think of Mother Teresa. We just had, our time of receiving our Lord in her chapel there, the chapel dedicated to her. That she said, God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the chosen or the called.
Yeah.
And so there's gifts that can be drawn out by necessity, or that they'll have the wisdom to get the right help. And I think it's most important, do they love Jesus and want to make Jesus known? So Thank you for that, starting off where it really counts. We're not a corporation as a church. We're not a business.
Oh, no.
We need those elements, but that doesn't make or break God's call on a person.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I just want to say that.
Someone else had a question over here. Okay, yeah, yes.
How did your parents and sister react when you first told them about your call?
Oh. Hopefully they won't watch this. If they do, I'm looking at you. I told my mother, I came home from a college night. That's what they called it at the time at St. Thomas More. They probably still do. Campus ministry group at St. Thomas More. And I came home and I was just like, it was after that search retreat, like that next Wednesday. And I lived with her for 4 years in my college. It's the best way to save money, right? I mean, I had practically no debt when I went to seminary. Live at home for 4 years for free? Absolutely. And so I woke her up and I came home and she stepped out of her room and I said, hey. So like here she is. She woke up like at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And I said, hey, I think I might be called to be a priest. And she was like, okay. Like kind of sleepy, like am I dreaming or something like that, And then I remember telling my dad he was in, for some trip back from Michigan to Oklahoma. We were loading our cars. This one didn't go so well. And I told him that and he said, well, son, I really hope you don't discount marriage. That was his next words to me, so his response. So, we get the good ones and the bad ones, and he still doesn't know exactly what to make of all this. So, but it's okay, right? Some of you win some, you lose some, right? So, yeah, Teresa.
Did you have any favorite devotions when you were growing up, or favorite saints? I know you referenced several saints in your talk, and how they affected you.
I didn't, and I remember like a week before confirmation, my mother said, you have to pick a saint for confirmation. And here's a saint book. So that's kind of cool she had a saint book, So, and I was looking through it and I was like, I think I've always wanted to go back to St. Mark and look at my confirmation record because we keep a record of all that. I'm pretty sure the saint I picked was Paul of the Cross. He's kind of an ascetic and, didn't let the world get to him and stuff like that. And honestly, like thinking back why I picked him, I really can't remember that other than just those things, So I didn't really. I didn't really understand, I don't think, that interplay between, the saints and, I probably bought into a lot of that kind of Protestant idea, like there's this separation between us and them, and why would we ask them to pray? Why don't we just go to the Lord directly, right? And so probably not, yeah. I remember praying the rosary as a child. I remember liking it, and I'm a daily prayer of the rosary now. So, yeah. Strange, but no, yeah. We were kind of Catholic light growing up, if you will. So, trying to make up for it. Yes, sir.
Father, since you've been ordained, where have you been assigned?
Oh, yeah. I've been a priest 16 years as of May 30th. So my first parish was St. Charles Borromeo in Oklahoma City for 3 years. And then a wonderful Hispanic community. Oh, my goodness. Just the kindest people in the world. Anyway, they're from mostly St. Charles are from southern Mexico. And that's where the flour tortillas are. The corn is the north. I love the flour tortillas. So I'm with the southern Mexicans. That's my thing. So anyway, sorry, food. Yeah. I've never met a flour tortilla I didn't like. And then after St. Charles, the bishop asked me after 3 years to go to Sacred Heart Church in Alva, Oklahoma, with missions in Cherokee and Waynoka. So I was there for 3 years, and a wonderful parishes. And then, you go from like the parish with like an organist full-time and staff and stuff like that, and you go to a parish and there's no parish secretary, You're it. There's no bookkeeper. You're it. The DRE is like, 2 hours a week, and so you're mostly it. And my little parish in Waynoka, we had about 12 people for Saturday Mass, except it's right in town with Little Sahara State Park. So about 3 or 4 times, these big families from Missouri would come down, and you'd have 60 or 70 people at Mass. You never knew on that Saturday who was going to show up at Our Mother of Mercy in Waynoka. And so anyway, a good 3 years there. And then Archbishop Coakley asked me to move to Prince of Peace Church in Altus with St. Helen. I think that's one of the coolest church names, St. Helen, in Frederick, Oklahoma. St. Helen was the mother of the Emperor Constantine. And when her son became a Christian, she went to the Holy Land and rescued the cross on which Jesus was crucified, And so brought it back to Rome. And if any church has a relic of the true cross, it's only because of St. Helen. So sadly, I was there for just 1 year in Altus and Frederick. And I got a call from Archbishop Coakley, and he said, Father Chuck Murphy in Guthrie has gotten real ill, and he needs to retire, and it's very sudden, and so I'd like you to move to Guthrie. And I just, you move in. I've learned you don't delay moving in now. When I got to Altus, I didn't hang anything up, pictures or whatever. Not like I have a whole bunch of pictures, but I didn't hang anything up. I had icons and stuff like that. And so for the first 7 months I was there in Altus, I didn't have anything on the walls in the house. And so I finally said, a priest friend said, I'm going to come and visit you. And I said, well, there's my excuse. I'm putting the pictures up. So I spent about 3 hours one day hanging things, get them all level. And he came, and the next week the Archbishop called and said, I need you to move. So anyway, learned my lesson. Don't wait. Put them up. So I moved to Guthrie, and I've been there for 9 years now. So yeah, finally get to stay someplace. Yeah. It's a great place, and the mission is St. Mary in Guthrie and St. Margaret Mary in Crescent. And like I said, Crescent's this little tiny church. And I'm not making fun of it. I love it. I actually love it to death. And if you want to think about how big the church is, think airplane lavatory. It's true, right? There's some parishioners there. The bathroom is small. The kitchen is small. But every Sunday they serve a hot breakfast after Mass. It is the most wonderful, loving people you'd ever encounter.
We may show up.
Well, you might just fill it up. And they have these girls that set up for Mass every Sunday, and they're a wonderful family. Every Sunday they ask me, how many hosts should we put out, Father? And I said, well, it's Father's Day. Let's put out 75 this time. So that's kind of our number in Crescent. Wonderful little church. Has like a 12-foot tall, the crucifix in that church is actually a stained glass window over the altar. And it's about 10 or 12 feet tall, and it's a crucifixion scene. So the Lord is there, the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, and St. John are there. And it faces east. So when the sun rises at 8 a.m. Mass on Sunday, the sun comes through that window, and it is magnificent. So I'm getting goosebumps talking. That's it. I've been now. What's that?
Was that designed by a Catholic?
It was. It's a Catholic church extension. It's a Catholic Extension Society church, and that was built. Bishop Kelly helped to bring outside groups that help fund the building of a church in mission territory, and so a lot of our churches in the diocese have these plaques, and ours has one in the back. the founding donor gets to name the parish. They get to pick a saint. So St. Margaret Mary was picked by this donor, I think it was Monsignor Coode, or I forget who it was, that gave the money in honor of his mother. So it must have been her patron saint or something like that, St. Margaret Mary. So, yeah. Richard's kind of walking up slowly, so I better...
Thank you, Father.
Yes. Yeah.